Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The state of immigration and the Dreamers in Memphis. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Mauricio Calvo, Executive Director of Latino Memphis. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Jennifer Shuba is a professor of international relations at Rhodes College. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
John Smorelli is president of CBU. Thanks for being here again.
Great to be joining you, Eric. Along
with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So as we tape this, we're actually taping this on Tuesday. The show's obviously airing on Friday. We've passed the deadline for DACA and the Dreamers, and I may turn to you, Mauricio, to back everyone up, because those terms now get thrown around a lot without much definition. Define the Dreamers, define DACA, and the significance of this deadline that in a way was not as significant it maybe seemed like it was going to be because of some legal maneuvering. Can I put all that on you?
Yeah. That's a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so let's go back a little bit. Obviously, DACA was an executive order put in place by President Obama in lieu of inaction from Congress. So at the time, the president said, these children, these people who came as children to the United States, if they meet certain criteria, let's say they have been here for a number of years, they have a clean criminal record, they register, they're eligible to have some kind of limbo status, some kind of protection. So the DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's a very long acronym. But basically, it's telling immigration, as the executive, somebody who oversees immigration, these children are undeportable if they meet all these conditions. Fast forward a few years, this was a renewable thing every 2 years. During the campaign, Candidate Trump at the time said, I am going to get rid of this thing on day one. He didn't. He let it go for a little longer into the first few months of the administration. And he put this artificial deadline of March 5th. Said, on March 5th, this thing is over. And his reasoning was, let Congress pick it up and make some legislative solution, which sounds like a good idea, except that they pulled the rug before anything was in place, like no recommendations on policy. So all this to say that March 5th was a really artificial deadline. In the last few months, we have seen everything from activists to top politicians talking about DACA and finding a permanent solution, but as expected, nothing has been able to happen. What is the hope that we have at this point is several states sue the administration. It went all the way to the courts of appeals, and is being held there. The president tried to rush it through the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, we're not going to listen to this. Bottom line, DACA is still in place. It's hanging from a string, really. But then pretty much the Supreme Court said, we're not going to listen to this. Yes, you have the right to pull an executive order, but you're going to harm a lot of people.
And about how many DACA kids are there in Memphis, give or take, and Tennessee, whatever number gives some sense of the local impact.
I mean, so it's hard to know exactly how many, but I would estimate that probably Memphis has about 3,500 to 4,000 DACA students. So the state of Tennessee has over 12,000, and most of them are divided in the major cities.
And John, we've been on the show before for any number of things going on at CBU. One is, though, CBU has been a real advocate for DACA, and invited DACA kids and undocumented immigrants into the school, and has been very loud about that going back a number of years. Your take on where we are with DACA right now?
Anxiety. Our students are just concerned about what the future holds for them, what's going to happen in terms of legislation. So what we've been trying to do is push legislation. How can we push legislation to get a permanent solution to DACA? And really, that's going to be our MO going forward. How do we get legislation going forward so that these students will be protected? Because certainly, they're incredible individuals. There's social opportunities, there's economic opportunities. They love this country, and all they want is a permanent solution to stay in a country which they love.
Yeah, and I'll turn to you, Professor Shuba. And some of this show that we're doing in part, about 3 weeks ago, we did a show in conjunction with American Creed, which is a special that PBS did, which is on the website, the American Creed show is, and as well as the special we did on it. But from your point of view, you're a professor of international relations, focused a lot on demographics. Yeah. Your perspective on where we are now as a country, you can localize as much as you want, on the attitudes toward immigration and the role of immigration, which has become so, I mean, some would say, and some would say rightly, that's what got President Trump elected. Yeah. Others obviously critical of that. I mean, there's different points of view. Yeah. But how does that fit in the holistic picture of immigration historically in the United States and maybe compared to other countries?
Sure. Well, it's nothing new, basically. So we're here in this moment. It feels so nasty that it can't possibly, feels like a break from the past, but it's not at all. It's just a continuation of more of the same, because alternately throughout America's history, we've been open to immigration and then we've closed the door. And a lot of it has been based, the times that we've closed the door, on race, ethnicity, particular country of origin, singling people out. So the U.S., becomes an official country in the late 1700s, and by the late 1700s, a few years later, we have our first exclusionary immigration policy. They wasted no time doing that. There have been all kinds of laws to keep out Chinese, Asian Exclusion Act, Chinese Exclusion Act. We've also had laws, immigration quota laws in the 1920s to try to specifically keep America white by restricting people from other countries. And so we've also had policies where we've been open to people. Typically during war is when the United States is more open to immigration, during the Civil War and during World War II with the Bracero program to bring in laborers from Mexico. So it's back and forth always in American history. So what we see today is in a sense just a continuation of the past.
And we'll come back and talk a little bit about, but I want to get Bill in here, but yeah. I'm also curious about other countries, because we sometimes think, America first, or America right. only is the only country struggling and trying to deal with this. Mm-hmm. And obviously the Trump administration is pointed some other countries and how they do immigration. Yeah. But let me first turn to Bill.
So, Mauricio, in watching the arc of this since the 2016 presidential general election, do you think the way forward on resolving this one way or another in terms of DACA is with the courts, or is it with Congress?
No, I mean, as an advocate, I am happy to hear that the courts have put an injunction, just kind of put the brakes on this thing while the legislative process takes place. I mean, nothing beats legislative process. I mean, that's the way to go. That's the way our Constitution is. That's the ultimate goal. I mean, the reality is, and we say this over and over again, is Congress is so broken. They cannot get anything done, and they are acting based on elections and just political gains rather than good policy, and that is the frustrating thing. So I mean, on theory, legislative approach would be always the best thing, but sometimes you need all these other pressures, including the courts, to allow for that. I mean, just right now it seems that, and rightfully so, with gun control, I mean, it seems like DACA has taken, nobody's talking about that, right? And rightfully so. But it's just like, these things have to rise to the top and create enough pressure. I mean, some people were saying, like, did the Dreamers shut the government down? I mean, it's all these dynamics of politics that are both fascinating and frustrating because nothing gets done.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. John, how is the anxiety affecting the role of Dreamers in the life of Christian Brothers University?
In general, we try to educate them, but their families, most of them are first generation, have no concept of college. And the fear of deportation, their families are putting tremendous pressure on them, saying, you may want to quit school because you're going to be deported and you need to save your money, save your money, and because deportation could occur. Those are the kind of fears that these individuals have. And what we're trying to do is work with Latino Memphis, thank God for some of their lawyers, and with our own administration to say, no, there's opportunity there, stick with it, stay with the program, and hopefully there'll be a legislative solution. What I've tried to do is go to Washington, try to influence our Congress people, work with community leaders to try to influence our congressional people, because that's the way it is. I mean, our country wants these Dreamers to stay. 86%, or whatever the latest poll said, that they want these Dreamers to stay. We've got an economy now that essentially we have 100% employment, given our current unemployment rate. We need trained individuals to contribute to our economy, and what better population than this 700,000 or 800,000 across the country of individuals who can contribute to this country. country by getting a good, high-quality education.
Does the uncertainty create its own dynamic in how this unfolds and how this gets resolved?
You mean the uncertainty for?
Yes.
Yeah, it does. It leads to making bad decisions. And I'll give you an example. So there is an open window right now where people can renew DACA, right? So because of the injunction of the Supreme Court, I mean of the Court of Appeals, so people can actually renew their DACA right now. You cannot apply for the first time, but you can renew. Well, some people are not applying for fear because you're saying, all right, so I am going to turn all my information right. Exactly. So you want people to do the right thing, but like you said, the circumstances and the anxiety may stop some people from doing the right thing, and I think that's just like one example of a consequence of the climate.
Right. Jennifer, in terms of the historical perspective, what I'm struck by is that in looking back at this, the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s had a lot of effect on where we are, and people really don't know that in terms of its impact on who is allowed to come to the United States and where our immigration has gone in the last 50 years.
Yeah, that's exactly what, when you look at the composition of the people who are here today, it's shaped by this 1965 law, actually immigration law. And that's what, you were talking about the legislative impasse a second ago, and I wanted to mention something about that. So nothing's getting done, and that is in part because immigration is not a Republican issue and it's not a Democrat issue as well. It really divides the parties within themselves because you have these pro-business Republicans who often, because of the employment situation, they really want to be more open to immigration. I mean, we even have businesses in Memphis, we're home to a lot of big businesses. They need people brought here to fill their tech jobs. So they need more H-1B visas. They want to see that program expanded and fast-forwarded. But then also on the Republican side, we know that there are people who are very nervous about the changing demographics of America, the shift in identity, and the fact that America is becoming, frankly, less white. But then on the Democrat side, you've got people who are against immigration there as well. And often a lot of your blue-collar workers and your union workers, they get caught up in at least the rhetoric or in the feeling that their jobs are being taken away. And then on the Democrat side, you have the pro-immigration people who, from a human rights standpoint or a civil rights standpoint, they want to see America more open. So it's not really in either party's best interest to either be very pro-immigrant or very anti-immigrant because they're going to lose people on both sides. And I think that's what you see happening today. So it makes you very pessimistic about anything permanently being done.
Let's stay with that big picture perspective, and particularly on the labor front. And you and I talked a little bit before the show about Japan, and Japan was part of your dissertation. And that the idea, I mean, Japan is doing well, so no one's particularly worried that they're going down the drain or something. But they have a kind of economic stagnation associated with their demographics and their shrinking population. And if I'm not mistaken, Japan has had very restrictive immigration policies for decades, centuries. Yeah. How is that, just from a pure economic point of view, playing out in the Japanese economy?
Well, I think it is interesting. Japan's a great case because it's our extreme. So they are the most aged country in the world. Their median age is 47, which means half the population's over 47. That's just tremendously old.
By comparison,
which is pretty young. By comparison.
But it was pretty young.
By comparison? Oh no, not for half. So by comparison, the youngest in the world is Niger, and it's 15.
And what is the United States?
And the United States, we're looking at like mid-30s.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
So we're in our mid-30s, robust mid-30s, and then but 47 is quite old when you think about that's your pool of people to work. So Japan has purposely, intentionally chosen we don't want to bring in immigrants. We see ourselves as a nation. So what they've done instead, the reason they've been able to compensate for some of this, is they've tried to bring two groups into the labor market specifically. One is older workers. So they've tried to get rid of a lot of their labor laws that forced people into mandatory retirement. They were so famous for these big rigid corporate systems. I remember those like in the 80s and 90s. They've gotten rid of that. They've tried to bring older people into the workforce, which because they're a pretty healthy country, they can do that. Their average age of exit from the workforce is 71, which is in Greece it's 55. So that's some more comparison there for you. And they've tried to bring women in as well. And that they have not had as much luck with because of the work-life balance. So It's, and that's tied in with their low fertility.
And so, and in the United States, and I'll go shift, but
Yeah.
I could do 26 minutes on the demographics,
I
so I'll try.
know.
But
Well, so can I.
in the United States, you've got a post-recession.
Yeah.
The idea is that more baby boomers are headed towards retirement,
Yeah.
so we are kind of moving towards that, where the traditional, stereotypical white, middle-class American, whatever that means, is retiring. But
Yeah.
also boomers are retiring, and so there is this argument that we're not growing the population, and the people who are going to work and pay the taxes for the next generation, for that older generation, to say, are probably going to need to be immigrants. That's a point of view.
The Pew Research Center in DC, a nonpartisan think tank, they've projected that 88% of future population growth in the U.S. will be immigrants, new immigrants, and their descendants. That means specifically the growth we see in the U.S. population is from people who are outside the United States.
And if you bring that to Memphis, Eric, I mean, look, I mean, I don't know what our city growth is every year. Maybe some years we might be at a deficit, or maybe just that right there. And I hate to do this, but like comparing to Nashville, like adding 100 people a day, right? We're not. And think about, when you talk about how this is an issue where many pro-business people are in favor, think about how many empty apartment complexes or empty houses we have in Memphis. We have 15,000 job openings in our city. I mean, I'm not saying that immigrants are going to solve that, but certainly we're part of the equation towards fixing the economy. The more people you have in any given community, people are buying goods, paying taxes, creating jobs. It's really common sense.
To the point, though, that, and there's a bit of a time shift here where we pre-taped a show with the relatively new U.S. Attorney, Michael Donovan, appointed by President Trump and Attorney General Jeff Sessions, approved by the Senate. We taped a week ago, and we talked about all kinds of things, gun safety, all kinds of issues that are high priorities for him and for the administration. But we also talked about immigration, and his point, and I'm going to paraphrase him, his point is that, look, these people are here, and let's shift from dreamers for a second, okay? Let's just shift to undocumented immigrants in the country. He would call them illegal immigrants, and he would say they are criminals. They are here without permission, without a visa, without any documentation. They are criminals, and he, as the U.S. Attorney for West Tennessee, is charged with prosecuting them if, he said, they come into the criminal justice system. They're not out there looking for them. But there is a tone about that, and that's factually correct, I assume. They are here illegally. And if you are a country of laws, how do you handle, from your point of view, the fact that there are people here illegally against the law?
Right. I mean, I would say two things. One is, you mentioned that he has priorities. Is this really a priority? I mean, with so many violent crimes in our city, with so many in our nation, I mean, are we putting the same emphasis on things that really matter and where people are really being hurt, or I mean, that's the number one thing. The number two thing is, I mean, we have criminalized immigration. Immigration law is not criminal law. I mean, there are criminal consequences to immigration violations, but it's a victimless offense. So people, and I have used this example before, people who under the Affordable Care Act do not have health insurance are in a clear violation of a federal law. Does that make them a criminal? Well, no. I mean, should be a consequence? Absolutely. Should be a penalty? Yes. Should be a pathway? Yes. But doesn't mean that we need to become and handcuff people and divide families. So I think the Attorney General's, the U.S. Attorney's priorities, in my opinion, are not set to what the most important things are.
Are we seeing, before I go back to Bill, and two things. One, to be fair to U.S. Attorney Donovan, we spent 20 of the 26 minutes talking about violent crime and efforts on gangs, and so that clearly is their highest priority.
Okay.
I just want to be fair to him, and again, that interview airs next week. To the criminalization, do you see more? I mean, we hear about it nationally. I think we've seen some in Memphis. More raids by immigration, custom enforcement, more roundups, more arrests of undocumented / illegal immigrants in Memphis.
What we have, and I think the national number is the detentions are 40% higher than the previous year, and that's obviously thousands and thousands of people. And not only the number increased, but what the kind of people that they're detaining. We have no priorities. Everybody's a priority, and when everybody's a priority, that's a pretty unsafe statement, because then you are not spending limited resources on people who are truly a priority, and you're just randomly picking people up.
And you would say, I'm sorry, and I'm going to go. You would say priorities, back to what you said before, would be criminal criminal immigrants, undocumented immigrants? Is that or
people
gang
who
members?
have committed serious crime that are a danger to the community? But picking up somebody who's just driving down the street is not a priority. Should not be a priority.
With the 6 minutes left, Bill.
And we've talked about this over several months that you have seen this with DACA in the state that it's in as of March 5th. Has there been an escalation here with ICE?
We have, not against DACA recipients. We haven't heard that here,
Right.
but it has been an escalation. I think the national rhetoric, and again, we have said this over and over again, my view on this is that because the president is so frustrated and so unable to get anything accomplished, he always seems to turn out to immigration as a campaign promise that he can try to deliver on. So, because that's kind of an easier low-hanging fruit at a very high cost.
From people you have heard from who have been in these incidents, what has the role of local law enforcement been?
Law enforcement has been tremendously good towards immigrants. I think they understand that it is not the role to enforce immigration law, for a number of reasons. When any community is terrified of their own law enforcement, it makes it for an unsafe environment for everybody. So if immigrants are afraid of police, they will not report crimes. If they don't report crimes, that makes all of us unsafe. So I have to applaud the efforts of our local law enforcement for staying. They say we're not going to come and defend you, but we're not going to cooperate either. Mm-hmm. So they have really stayed out of what their jurisdiction is. Enforcing traffic laws, enforcing whatever. We'll go after warrants when people have a warrant, but they're not really crossing the lines. Just like a police officer will not ask you about your IRS deduction on your tax return. MPD officers shouldn't be asking people about their immigration status, and they're not.
Yeah.
Are you watching the Tennessee legislature for any indication that there might be some mandate for local police departments?
We always say that local politicians or state politicians cannot fix the immigration issue. They can certainly make it worse. And I think in the state, like in many other issues, Nashville is really trying to make our life miserable. They make all these proposals that make no sense, but they are certainly trying. And there are a bunch of bills this year.
Let me bring you back in. From a international perspective, other countries, President Trump has talked about wanting to go to a much more of a merit-based system to get away from lottery systems where, quote unquote, anyone can come in, to get away from what he calls, and some people find offensive, other people just call a term chain migration. Right. What do other countries do? Western, Australia or Canada. Let's go with any country you want to pick. What do other countries do that the United States doesn't?
Well, it's actually not that different, and that's what can be so confusing about when President Trump says we're not on a merit-based system. That is a very confusing statement, because we do have a merit-based system, but we also do give opportunities for family reunification, this thing called chain migration, but it is barely so. You could bring your tiny children or your spouse from abroad if you are a citizen and if you're a permanent resident. But so other countries, it's pretty similar. They will look for, thinking specifically about Western Europe, Canada, Australia, they look for skills that they're missing in their workforce. They bring people in, but they also tend to allow people to bring in family members. And so pretty much all across our Western democracies, the same debates are happening. Australia even excised some islands, meaning they said, oh no, that's not Australia, when a bunch of refugees landed on them a few years ago. So it's really similar to what's happening in the U.S.
And again, I should say, this is, as I mentioned earlier, we did an American Creed show that was focused on the PBS documentary, and that show aired a couple weeks ago. And you can find the PBS documentary, American Creed, on the website. But with just a couple minutes left here, I'm going to do a complete shift because we have you here, and wanted to talk a little bit about CBU's involvement most recently with the Jubilee Schools.
Sure.
For people who don't know what the Jubilee Schools are, what are they, what happened, and what is CBU's role?
There were, again, for about 10 to more years, there are these schools that are target toward populations in poor neighborhoods. There were Catholic schools that were first closed and reopened, and the mission being to serve the neighborhood. And so they were Jubilee schools. We're very fortunate that the Jubilee schools were supported by local philanthropists who made it all possible. And then because of financial issues and other issues, the diocese chose to close the Jubilee schools next year in 2019.
There are about 8 of them?
There's about eight to 9 of them, depending how you count them these days. And so we felt very strongly that as a Catholic school, as a Catholic college in the Memphis community, that we should become involved. So the solution that we're proposing right now is a charter-based school, whereby these schools would be a charter. We create a new charter organization, 501c3. I'm chair of that new board. The Compass Schools, or the New Day Charter organization that we've created. And in creating this organization, what we've now done is provide an opportunity to keep the mission going, keep the neighborhood school option going, and still maintain what the vision of those schools are.
And with just 30 seconds left,
Sure.
this is not your first foray into charter schools. You are involved with the STEAM Academy
and Crosstown on STEAM, Middle College High. So we're really, I mean, there's been a number of, STEAM and Middle College are Shelby County schools. Crosstown and the Jubilees would be charters. And so we're really excited about the opportunities, training new teachers, and just developing new urban initiatives here in Memphis. And I'm being quick here.
No, that was great. No, thank you. And I cut you off. We could do, we'll do a whole show on that. Thank you all for being here. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.